So you're living paycheck to paycheck. You're always trying to figure out how to make ends meet, and life is hard. And then you go to YouTube and you look up videos on how to get out of debt and how to stop living paycheck to paycheck, and everybody says, "Oh, it's easy. All you have to do is just take 50% of your income and start investing it, and then you can pay off your debt super easily." Well, if I could afford to stop living off of 50% of my income, it would be way easy to pay off my debts. But there's a reason why I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I can't just take 50% of what I'm making and invest it. I know you're frustrated. I was frustrated too. I know what it's like. And I'm going to go through and share my experiences on how I did it. And spoiler alert, it's not fast, it's not easy, it takes time, and it's hard. So let's go into it and let's talk about this. Okay, so let's go over 3 of the reasons that I identified for myself of why I was living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe you can relate to some of these. So the 3 reasons were: I didn't make enough money, I had too much debt, or I spent too much of my paycheck every time I got paid. And sometimes it was a combination of all 3 of these. And so I had to realize what was going on. I had to realize that at first I knew that I wasn't making enough money. And so I had to figure out a way to start making more money. So that was when I started doing DoorDash. I started doing DoorDash after work and on the weekends so that I could make a little bit more money. But I also knew that I had too much debt at the same time. So I knew that if I had less debt, the money I was making might have been enough. But I had so much debt that the money I was making wasn't enough to cover everything I needed. And the other thing that I was doing was I had a bad habit of spending all of my paycheck. And it was hard for me to get in a habit of living off of a little bit less and living below my means, or living within my means. So first things first, in order to make a change, you have to realize that this is something that you don't enjoy. I mean, it's fairly easy to realize that you don't like living paycheck to paycheck. You don't like scrambling to make ends meet, and you don't like not having very much money. So it's easy to realize that. But the hard part is to realize that you need to change your habits. Usually, people don't realize that they need to make these changes until they hit rock bottom. And that's always a terrible thing and a very hard thing to go through when you hit rock bottom, because then you have to figure things out. You're forced to make a change. And if you could make a change in your habits, in your mindset, in your mentality before you hit rock bottom, that's a way better outcome. Because if you have to go through bankruptcy or do anything like that, they could have long-lasting effects, and it could hurt you mentally and emotionally and financially and everything. So if you can get out before you hit rock bottom, that's a much better scenario. So for me, at first I was doing okay. My wife and I had just gotten married, and then we moved out of state for me to go to school to have a better opportunity for a better paying job. When I was going to school, I was working minimum wage, and my wife was also working a job that paid minimum wage. And we had moved to California, so it was much more expensive than where we came from, and it was really hard. We were struggling, we were barely eating because we didn't have much money, and we were always living paycheck to paycheck. And the only way we would get more was that California would slowly bump up the minimum wage every year, but then also everything else got more expensive because minimum wage came out. So all the way through school, we were kind of struggling. I was able to get another job, and my wife started making a little bit more money at her job. And so we were starting to make a little bit more. But since we had just moved in from a different state and we had just gotten married, we had a lot of debts that we were trying to pay down. And so there was a lot of different things working against us. Now, when I finally graduated a couple years later, I started making a little bit more money. At least I wasn't making minimum wage, but I was making a little bit more. But also at the same time, my student loan debts kicked in. And so I was making more money, but also I had more debts that were even higher, and trying to pay all those was very difficult. And then life always happens, so the car that I was driving broke down. I had to get another car, so I took on another car payment. And so things kind of just started piling on. And it got frustrating because as I would make more money, all of a sudden my bills would go up and things would change. And so it got really frustrating and I felt really trapped. And one thing that I looked at was I saw that after I graduated, I started my new job, I started making money. I saw the guys that had been working there for years and years and years. Some of them have been working there longer than I've been alive. And I saw how hard they worked, and I saw all the different things that they went through, and I realized that they've been working there super hard their whole lives, and sometimes they're still struggling to make ends meet. And that hit me like a slap in the face. I didn't want to go through working my whole life to be struggling and living paycheck to paycheck the whole time. And so that was a real awakening for me, and that's when I really started to think about things. I started into looking into different ways to make money. That was when I started doing DoorDash a little bit, started looking for different side hustles, started looking into investing and doing all these different things, because I knew there was all these people in the world that a lot of them didn't even go to college and they're making millions of dollars. So there had to be better ways to get out of this kind of system. And so that's when I started learning about investing and all these different things. But if you're living paycheck to paycheck, it's really hard to start investing. So let's talk about how I made the necessary changes in order to have money to invest. So it took a few years, and it was a very slow process because I had a lot of debt and I was struggling to make ends meet. I was making just enough money to get by, and so it was tough. And there was a lot of things that I didn't have. There was a lot of things that I lived without that I really wanted to get. And so anytime I would get money, I would go and buy those things that I had deprived myself of for all this time. And my wife and I would want to go out to eat to an expensive restaurant because we hadn't been there in a while. And so it was kind of tough. And so I came up with this plan because I had seen all these people talking about, oh, you just have to start investing 50% of everything you earn, and then you'll make a lot of money fast. It's super easy. And I realized there's no way that I could possibly do that. But what I could do was I could take some of my spare change and I could go out to eat a little bit less. I could go buy new clothes a little bit less often. Do all these things and take a little bit of that money and start investing it. And as I did that, the 1 year I would invest, let's say about 1% of my paycheck. Each paycheck I'd take 1% of it, set it aside, and start investing it. And then after I did that for a little bit, I went through and I was learning about investing, and so I made a little bit of money and I lost a little bit of money. And that was also kind of when I started into cryptocurrency. I learned a little bit about cryptocurrency, put some money in there, lost a bit of money. And so it hurt. Everything I invested that I lost really hurt because it was money that I couldn't really afford to live without, but it was still technically my spare change. And so it hurt to see that money be lost because it was money that I really could have used in other places, but I was able to live without it. So then as time went on, I started making a little bit more money, but I would pretend that I didn't get any more money. And so by doing that, I was still living off the same amount. I started paying off some of my debts, and that made it so it felt like I had a little bit more money. And that way I could take a little bit more money to invest and save. And then once I had saved up a little bit more, then I could pay off more of my debts. And then it made it so I had room to breathe. I wasn't living necessarily from paycheck to paycheck, but I had a little bit of breathing room. But then I also had to fight back my habits of wanting to go out to expensive restaurants and eat and go and buy new clothes and different things like that. And this took time. So the way for me was every time I got a raise or every time I made extra money, I'd set that money aside. And ideally, what you want to do is invest a little and pay off as much debt as possible. And for a long time, I was trying not to invest at all and only pay off my debts and put money into my emergency fund. But I would justify too many emergencies. Something would happen, I would say, oh, I really need to use my emergency fund now. And I got so frustrated because I would justify my emergencies so much that I basically had no emergency fund and I had nothing left. And so I was trying to make these changes, but I still wasn't making any progress. So finally I got to the point where I decided that one of my credit cards was going to be my emergency fund. And that scared me because if I needed cash, I would get penalized for using that cash transfer from the credit card. And the money that I was putting in my emergency fund, I started investing it instead. And putting these restraints really made a change, because now I was scared to use my emergency fund because it came from a credit card and I didn't want to have more debt. And so I started changing the way I looked at emergencies and making it so that I really only did use it for emergencies when I really needed the money. And I started focusing more on trying to pay down some of my debts, but also putting more aside into investing. And it was money that I could technically live without when I was investing, but it hurt to put it away because I wanted to use it. And so gradually 1% of my paycheck went to 3%, and then 3% went to 5%, and then 5% went to 10%. And little by little, I started making more while I was investing as I was learning and doing different things. And then also, I would take more of that money and I would start paying off my debts. And then by paying off more and more debts, then I had more breathing room. And then I could put more money into investing. So this is a hard process to go through because it's hard to make the changes you need to in order to stop living the way that you are when you're stuck living paycheck to paycheck. You'll need to identify what's causing you to live paycheck to paycheck. If you're simply not making enough money, or if you have too much debt, or if you spend too much money, then you need to start learning how to live below your means so that you have extra money left over. And you need to find ways to pay off your debts, whatever it is that's holding you back. And the hard thing is that our society teaches us that we need to live in debt. They don't teach us to spend what we have, but they teach us to spend the limit that we can borrow. And that way, the banks and credit card companies are making lots of money off of us because we can borrow 10 times more than we're making as long as we can make the minimum payments every month to keep us afloat. And that's what they want us to think, is they want us to learn how to they want us to think that, if we can borrow money, we can afford it. But you shouldn't think that way. And it's really hard to get out of a situation once you get too far into it. If you get 10 credit cards, you max them all out. Now you can barely afford to make all the minimum payments, and you have so much debt that you can't stop living paycheck to paycheck. So you have to identify this, realize it, and make the necessary changes and change your way of thinking, change your mindset before it gets too far. And it's a long process to get back out. It's really easy to get into debt, but it's really hard to get out of debt. And this is where some of the strategies that Dave Ramsey recommends are really helpful. Now, I have a mixed opinion on Dave Ramsey because when it comes to investing, I don't like his style very much at all. But when it comes to paying off debt, teaching yourself discipline and doing different things like that, I think he is very good about teaching you how to discipline yourself and to be smart and change the way that you're thinking. So you need to find ways to start paying off your debts. And that way you can start setting aside little by little more and more money to invest and to pay off more debts. So I'm going to talk about a couple different plans. So one of the plans that I like is by Minority Mindset. And they're another YouTube channel, and they have a lot of really good videos on getting out of debt, investing, learning how to use your money wisely, and growing your wealth. And they talk about completely changing the way you think and being part of the minority type mindset, because the majority of people think about having the most new, best expensive things, living in debt, living on everything they can borrow, and different things like that. So they have a lot of good lessons and good plans and good videos to teach you how to change your mindset and do things differently. So what they talk about is they say with every paycheck or every time you get paid, you should keep 75% of that for your needs, take 15% of it, put it into your savings and save it for a future opportunity, and take 10% of it and invest. And I think that's really good. That's a good plan if you can afford to do that. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, obviously that's a really hard thing to do. And another good plan that I really like is from The Richest Man of Babylon. there is a story about a man named Dabasir. And Dabasir came up with this plan to pay off his debts. He said that with every paycheck, every time he got paid, he would take 70% of it to pay for his needs, he would take 10% of it to invest, and he would take 20% of it to pay off all of his debts. And as he did this over time, he was able to invest at the same time while he paid off all of his debts. And he was very diligent with it, and he was able to pay off all of his debtors. And so these are a couple different plans, but like I said, if you're living paycheck to paycheck, you need to start out really small. You need to find a way to take your spare change and maybe 1% of your paycheck, if you can spare that, and start putting that into your savings, or preferably into a savings account that will pay you interest for holding money in there. And you can grow that up slowly and start to pay off your different debts, and then you can put in more money. And I also liked putting money into investments at the same time, because my investments would grow at the same time that I was putting other money aside to pay off my debts. And then if it got to a good point, I could sell off some of my investments, make more money than I would have saved, and pay off more of my debts. So I like to take a combination approach rather than just trying to focus on only pay off your debts. I like to invest some money too, because it's really easy for me to get distracted and say, oh yeah, I'll pay this off and I'll pay this off, and then I start using more of it. And if I put that money in investments, then it's harder for me to access. All right, so let's recap some of these things. So living to paycheck is no fun, and it happens to a lot of people. So we need to remember that it happens, you don't like it, identify that you don't like it, and realize that you need to make some changes. And hopefully you realize before you hit rock bottom, because it's much easier to recover if you can stop yourself and fix things before you hit rock bottom, rather than hitting rock bottom and trying to start over. So start to try to live below your means a little bit. If you're not making enough money, you could see maybe you could pick up some overtime. Maybe you could get another job. Maybe you could start doing a side hustle, go to DoorDash, Instacart, something like that, just to bring in some more money. Take some of that money, and my approach would be to invest a little bit of it and use other parts to pay off debt. Right now I'm trying to work up to the Dabasir debt repayment plan, which is I take 10% and I invest it, I keep 20% of my paycheck and use that to repay debts, and then the 70% is what I live off of. And as you start doing it for a little while, you start getting more and more used to it, and the 70% starts to feel like 100%. And then you get used to living below your means, and you're able to invest and make it so that your income starts to grow. So those are some of my thoughts. And also, it's hard to get out of that mentality of living on how much you can borrow rather than how much you actually have, because that's what society wants us to think. The big banks want us to open up credit cards so that we can take out more debt and we can continually pay them so that they can just sit around and collect money from us. But you want to make sure that you take care of yourself. You want to make sure that you are smart with your money so that you can start to gradually create wealth. And once you're ready to start creating wealth, that's where all the different investments start to come into play. So identify what's causing you to live paycheck to paycheck. Are you not making enough? Are you in too much debt? Or do you just have a bad habit of spending 100% of your paycheck every time you get paid? Identify what's causing you to live paycheck to paycheck, and then make a plan so that you can stop doing whatever's causing you to live paycheck to paycheck. Then as you start getting some breathing room, start to invest a little bit. Start to invest 1%, 3%, 5%, whatever you can afford. If it's not 1%, just start putting in your spare change. And there's a lot of free and easy investing accounts, like you could use Robinhood, M1 Finance, Webull, and a lot of the bigger brokerages like Fidelity, TD Ameritrade, and Charles Schwab all have free accounts now as well. And for bigger accounts like TD Ameritrade and Charles Schwab, it might be kind of hard to invest your spare change because they don't do much fractional investing. But Fidelity and Robinhood and all of these other smaller ones, they do allow you to do fractional shares. So you can put in your spare change into Apple, or you can put your spare change into Amazon, different things like that. You don't have to buy a full share. So consider using some of these brokerage accounts to help start learning how to invest. And you're going to make mistakes at the beginning, and that's fine. You have to learn slowly, and it's going to hurt. But as you research and you invest more and you practice, then you start making better choices, you start learning more, and you start changing your opportunities. So if you're new to investing and you want to learn more about it, I'll leave a link to one of my beginner investing videos. And also you can check out more of my videos about investing and also some of my videos about crypto, and start learning about different investing styles and how you can increase your income and how you can make your investments grow over time. Also, if you want to check out where I found this shirt, it's from Handbrake Jake on YouTube from Wheeled Automotive. And I'll leave a link where you can get some of the cool merch that he has. So thanks everybody for watching. If you have any good ideas on how you can get out of debt or how you can increase your investments, go ahead and leave them in the comments so that we can all learn together. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.